Imagine for a second that the way society views the ultimate criminal punishment is, well, completely backward.
Oh, that is a heavy thought experiment to start with.
Right. But what if the very systems we have built to deliver justice are actually violating the deepest philosophical rules they were supposedly founded on?
I mean, it really shakes the foundation of what we think is fair.
Exactly. If you take only one thing away from our discussion today, it should be this. There is a very compelling argument out there that our modern justice system might just be built on an emotion, specifically revenge.
Yeah, when it really should be built entirely on utility and protection.
Spot on. Welcome to the deep dive. We are going on a mind-bending exploration of criminal justice today, and it's designed to challenge absolutely everything you think you know about crime, punishment, and the fundamental rights of the individual.
It is a massive paradigm shift we're looking at today. We're exploring a highly provocative academic paper presented by Tennyson Samraj.
This was at the 13th Annual International Conference on Philosophy, right?
Yeah, exactly. In Athens, Greece, back in May 2018, the paper is titled Understanding Euthanasia in the Context of Capital Crimes. Unusual, but not cruel.
Now, before we really get into the weeds here, we are dealing with capital punishment and euthanasia.
Two very heavy topics.
Very heavy. These are arguably two of the most sensitive, politically and morally charged topics that exist in modern society. Because of that, we need to lay down a very important ground rule for how we are going to approach this deep dive for you listening today.
Absolutely. We want to be perfectly clear to you listening. We are not taking sides, nor are we endorsing the viewpoints of this author.
Right. Our mission today is strictly to act as your guides.
Impartially unpacking the philosophical arguments exactly as they are presented in this original source material. We are here to explore the architecture of these ideas, regardless of where they fall on the political or moral spectrum.
Okay, let's unpack this. The core thesis Samraj puts forward is wild. He argues that capital punishment, as it is administered by the state today, should be completely abolished and replaced with life imprisonment.
But he introduces a radical twist to that.
He does. He says inmates who are serving life sentences should be given the legal option of euthanasia. And to be very clear on the framing here, euthanasia wouldn't be the punishment itself.
Right. That is a critical distinction Samraj makes. Euthanasia in this framework is not some covert way for the state to execute the criminal.
It would be a voluntary choice offered to the prisoner.
Yes. It is an option for the criminal to exit life if they find the reality of life imprisonment to be unbearable. To understand how he arrives at this pretty radical conclusion, we have to strip everything back and look at the very foundation of the justice system.
Which brings up a question I think anyone would naturally ask when reading this premise. Why did we actually lock people up in the first place?
It's the ultimate question.
Beyond the emotional reaction to a crime, what are the actual rules governing how a state is allowed to punish a human being?
Samraj grounds his entire argument in the concept of lex talionis. That translates roughly to the law of retaliation, or the foundational rules of punishment. He outlines 5 key principles that a penal philosophy must follow to be considered just. First, the punishment has to fit the crime.
Makes sense.
Second, the punishment must be rendered until the wrongdoings are actually stopped. Third, it has to be prescribed by law, meaning the state cannot just invent a new punishment after a crime has been committed.
You can't just change the rules retroactively.
Exactly. Fourth, the authority to punish belongs exclusively to the state, not to vigilantes. And fifth, and this is the linchpin of his entire paper, no punishment can involve torture, cruelty, or humiliation.
So if the ultimate goal of the state is just to stop the wrongdoing, Samraj uses the word incapacitation, meaning the state's only justifiable job is to remove the threat from society.
Yes, just remove the threat.
But here is where he points out a glaring contradiction in our current system. We could call it the cruelty paradox.
I like that term.
If the unbreakable rule of lex talionis is no cruel or unusual punishment, how do our modern ultimate punishments hold up to that standard? Samraj makes the bold claim that both capital punishment and life imprisonment are fundamentally cruel.
What's fascinating here is how he defines that cruelty, because it splits into 2 distinct categories.
Right.
Capital punishment is categorized as physical cruelty. It is the actual mechanical act of the state terminating a biological life.
which is undeniably a physical extreme.
But then you have life imprisonment, especially when you factor in solitary confinement or the total removal of a person from society until they die. He categorizes that as mental torture.
Locking a human being in a cage for the rest of their natural life with zero hope of an exit or a pardon inflicts a deep, sustained psychological torment.
It puts the state in an impossible position. If both of the ultimate options available to the justice system are fundamentally cruel, what is the government supposed to do?
Samraj argues the state has to look at its actual bare minimum job description. The justifiable responsibility of the state is only incapacitation. Protecting you, protecting me, protecting the community by removing the dangerous individual.
He argues the state absolutely has the moral and legal right to incarcerate, but it does not have the moral right to kill. State-sponsored executions, in his view, are a profound overreach of power.
Taking that a step further, the author is really asking us to decouple incapacitation from retribution. The state, out of necessity for public safety, must incapacitate dangerous people.
They have to.
But the desire to strap someone to a gurney and execute them, the philosophy suggests that is just revenge dressed up in the bureaucratic language of justice.
That concept of revenge brings up a fascinating historical detail in the text that totally flips a common cultural assumption.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
When people hear lex talionis, the immediate thought goes to the Old Testament, an eye for an eye.
We culturally use that phrase as a mandate for harsh, bloody retaliation. The assumption is, if someone hits you, the law says you're supposed to hit them back just as hard.
The modern colloquial understanding of that phrase has definitely drifted into a justification for vengeance. But Samraj points out that the Hebrew mind, as he terms it, actually established the eye for an eye principle to do the exact opposite.
It was historically created to limit punishment, not to maximize it.
Precisely.
Because let's be honest, human nature is incredibly petty and escalatory. If you step on my shoe, my instinct isn't just to step on your shoe. My instinct is to throw your shoe in the river.
Or if someone breaks your arm, the raw emotional response isn't to just break their arm in return, it's to burn their house down.
That escalatory nature is exactly what ancient legal codes were trying to curb. Many historical scholars argue the Hebrews didn't actually go around scooping out literal eyes.
The rule was a mandated boundary line. It was meant to guarantee proportionality and establish a basis for appropriate compensation.
It explicitly said to the victim, you cannot inflict more injury than the crime you suffered.
It was a limitation on runaway revenge, ensuring that whatever the compensation ended up being, it remained dignified and strictly proportional.
Think about how that connects to the modern debate for a second.
Yeah.
We have this ancient, thousands of years old legal code that was specifically designed to prevent disproportionate state violence and cruelty.
And Samraj uses that ancient attempt at limiting cruelty to build his modern argument against the death penalty.
Right. If the entire point of an eye for an eye was to mandate a chill-out period and limit physical cruelty, then a state executing a prisoner today violates that ancient standard of restraint.
If a society truly wants to honor proportionality without crossing the line into cruelty, life imprisonment handles the incapacitation requirement perfectly. The offender is removed and society is safe.
But because life imprisonment inherently involves the mental torture of endless confinement, the philosophy argues the criminal needs an out.
They need an option to escape that mental torture if they choose to.
Which, on its face, sounds incredibly futuristic. The idea of a criminal choosing to essentially press a button to end their own life feels like something out of a dystopian sci-fi novel.
It really does.
But the author doesn't look to the future for a precedent for this idea. He actually looks to ancient history.
He looks specifically to ancient Greece. The author brings up the trial of Socrates, which is a foundational moment in Western philosophy,
Socrates was prosecuted by a young Athenian named Meletus.
for essentially corrupting the minds of the youth and questioning the established gods and authorities of the city.
He was a philosopher doing what philosophers do, annoying the people in power by asking too many questions, and the state put him on trial for his life over it.
Socrates was ultimately condemned by the Athenian state, but the crucial distinction Samraj highlights is the method of his punishment. The state did not physically execute him.
They gave him a choice.
Yes, he could either be ostracized, which meant permanent exile and banishment from Athens, or he could drink a cup of poison hemlock.
I know the author points to Plato's writings here, specifically the Apology, the Crito, and the Phaedo.
Right.
For those who might not be familiar, these are basically the first-hand accounts and philosophical dramatizations of Socrates' final days. And in these texts, we see Socrates willingly become his own executioner.
His friend Crito actually visits him in his cell and tries to convince him to escape, offering to bribe the guards.
But Socrates refuses the prison break. He didn't want to live in exile away from his home, so he accepted the judgment and actively chose to drink the hemlock himself.
In the Phaedo, Socrates argues extensively that death is not something to be feared, simply because we cannot fear what we do not know.
He chose the unknown of death, rather than being forced to live in a way he found completely unbearable, which for him was life outside of Athens.
Samraj uses this historical event to point out a massive gap in modern penal systems. Almost no modern legal framework allows the guilty to punish themselves or to be the agent of their own execution.
We just do not have a mechanism for it today. Modern states have completely monopolized the act of execution.
By bringing up Socrates, the text shows that the idea of a self-inflicted exit isn't some edgy new invention. It is a foundational part of Western philosophy.
Even in his condemnation, Socrates was allowed to maintain his autonomy.
Autonomy really is the hinge of the entire second half of Samraj's argument. He transitions from the mechanics of how we punish people to the deeper philosophy of human rights. Specifically, he wades into the debate over the right to die.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We already see euthanasia being discussed, and in many places legalized, in the medical world.
Samraj points out that in countries like Switzerland, Canada, and the Netherlands, medical euthanasia is legal under certain frameworks.
In those specific contexts, the right to die is increasingly considered a fundamental human right. If a patient is facing unbearable terminal physical suffering, they have the right to request a dignified exit.
So the author asks a deeply challenging question. Shouldn't that same human right extend to the criminal world?
If a criminal is facing the unbearable mental torture of life in solitary confinement, a life they know they will never be released from, the philosophical question is why the state suddenly has the authority to revoke their right to choose when that suffering ends.
To back up that idea of autonomy, Samraj brings in the French philosopher Albert Camus.
Camus famously tackled this exact idea when he argued that suicide is the one truly serious philosophical question.
He believed that the decision of whether life is worth living or whether to live or die is a decision that can only be made by the individual as a person.
It is the ultimate exercise of the self against the absurdity of the universe. Camus argued the state cannot negate that right. It is inherent to simply being human.
Samraj takes Camus's philosophical stance on autonomy and applies it directly to legal doctrine. He looks specifically at the principle of habeas corpus.
But wait, legally speaking, doesn't the state have a strict duty to keep prisoners alive once they are in custody?
They do.
If the state has the body, they are responsible for the body.
Right.
How does the author get around that legal hurdle to justify allowing a prisoner to choose euthanasia?
That is where the nuance of habeas corpus comes in. The term literally means you shall have the body. It is a foundational legal concept designed to protect citizens against unlawful detention.
Right.
But Samraj points out that it also demands the protection of a person's life and limbs before, during, and after the trial. The state is strictly forbidden from inflicting bodily harm on you.
Meaning, if the state straps you to a chair and administers a lethal injection, that is a direct physical violation of habeas corpus.
Yeah.
The state is actively destroying the body it is supposed to be holding.
Samraj argues that capital punishment clearly violates habeas corpus. However, giving a criminal the mere option of euthanasia does not violate it.
How so?
Think of it in terms of negative and positive rights. Negative rights basically mean the right to be left alone. The state cannot force you to stay alive in a cage against your will, enduring mental torture. Positive rights are the right to access something. In this case, the state providing access to the medical means for a dignified exit. By offering the choice, the state isn't harming the prisoner. The state is merely respecting the prisoner's agency.
It represents a total shift in who holds the ultimate power over life and death. The philosophy here suggests that nobody should be killed except the person who explicitly wants to die.
And no one who wants to live should ever be executed by the government.
And no one who wants to die should be forced to live in a concrete box for 50 years against their will.
Consider how this ties into the broader concepts of forgiveness and pardon. Samraj brings in Thomas Hobbes, the English philosopher known for his work on the social contract.
Hobbes argued that punishment has a natural boundary. If a criminal is given a prison sentence, then once that allotted time is served for the crime, society has a duty to pardon the offender and integrate them back into the fold as a citizen.
It is the classic social contract. You do the crime, you do the time, and then your debt is paid. You are allowed to start over.
The ideal purpose of a justice system involves repentance, rehabilitation, and eventually reconciliation.
But what happens in capital crimes where the punishment is life without the possibility of parole?
That's the breaking point for the social contract.
Samraj points out that in these specific cases, society has deemed the crime so severe or the individual so dangerous that pardon is practically impossible. The state is permanently closing the door and essentially saying, we will never forgive you and you will never return to us.
And if society completely refused to forgive, and the criminal finds the reality of that endless confinement completely unbearable, Samraj argues that forcing them to exist in that state for decades is just prolonged cruelty.
If they cannot ever rejoin society and they cannot endure the isolation, euthanasia provides a dignified exit.
He uses this incredibly striking phrase to describe life without parole. Without the right to die, life in that scenario becomes a petrified state of being.
A petrified state of being. It is a haunting way to describe it. You are biologically breathing, your heart is beating, but socially, legally, and philosophically, you are already dead.
You are frozen in time inside a cell, serving no purpose other than being a monument to your own crime.
Samraj argues that forcing someone to remain in that petrified state against their will is not justice. It is just sustained, state-sponsored cruelty.
So, what does this all mean when we zoom out? Let's try to pull all these philosophical threads together. Tennyson Samraj is proposing a massive overhaul of our ethical and legal frameworks.
He is outlining a system where the state entirely removes itself from the business of killing.
The state's only justifiable job is to protect you and me by putting dangerous individuals in prison. Incapacitation. Full stop.
By replacing the death penalty with life imprisonment concurrent with the option of euthanasia, this theoretical system achieves two massive things simultaneously.
First, it protects society from the dangerous criminal, fulfilling the requirement of incapacitation.
Second, it protects the individual's autonomy against unbearable mental torture. The criminal regains the ultimate human right to make a choice about their own existence, much like Socrates did in ancient Athens.
It really forces us to look in the mirror as a society. It makes you stop and ask yourself, what are our true underlying motivations when we demand ultimate criminal justice?
It is a profound interrogation of societal motives. Are we, as a public, genuinely trying to stop crime and protect our communities?
Because if protection is the only goal, locking someone away for life achieves that perfectly. The threat is gone.
Or are we ignoring the ancient wisdom of an eye for an eye as a necessary limit on cruelty, and instead utilizing the massive apparatus of the state to satisfy a much darker primal urge for retribution?
That is a deeply uncomfortable question for any society to answer. Because if incapacitation works perfectly well to keep us safe, the only logical reason left to execute a human being is because it feels satisfying to punish them.
Samraj's philosophy clearly argues that a civilized, modern society should not operate its legal system based on emotional vengeance.
He actually states that how we punish the criminal ultimately defines how civilized we are. Presenting the option of euthanasia treats the convicted individual as a human being who still possesses agency, rather than just an object to be mechanically destroyed by the government.
It allows for the cessation of a dangerous criminal's life without requiring society to bloody its own hands in the process.
Which leaves us with a tremendous amount to chew on today. We have covered ancient Greek philosophy, the true meaning of biblical translations, the cutting edge of modern human rights, and the core responsibilities of a government.
It covers a lot of ground.
It really does. But I want to leave you, the listener, with a final lingering question. Something that builds on Samraj's entire paper, but pushes it into new territory for you to ponder on your own after this deep dive ends.
Let's hear it.
If we ever actually adopted this proposed system, a world where the state only incarcerates, and the ultimate punishment of death becomes purely a voluntary private choice made by the offender behind closed doors, what happens to the concept of closure for the victims of these terrible crimes?
That is the unseen side of the equation, the emotional reality of the people left behind.
Exactly. If the offender holds the keys to their own exit, if they get to decide exactly when, where, and how they leave this world, does society still feel that justice has been served? Or does giving the ultimate criminal true, unassailable autonomy somehow rob the public and the victims of the retribution they feel they are owed? It is a heavy, heavy thought to wrestle with.
It really is.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We hope it gave you some incredible new perspectives to consider. Keep unpacking the ideas you encounter, keep questioning the structures of the world around you, and we will catch you on the next one.